In 2010, I saw one. Wasn't really sure what I saw. I was traveling across northern Wisconsin with a business associate. We saw something cross the road in front of us right around dusk. And we saw it cross two oncoming lanes and then grass median, then in front of us. And it's kind of a reddish brown, big creature. And I clearly saw that it was bipedal. I could tell that it was looked like it was running because I could see like a leg motion, which I didn't know what I was seeing. I certainly didn't think Bigfoot. We, after it went by and then it went over a fence. And to me, it looked like it hurdled it. I went back, checked the fence out. It was over 5 foot tall. We thought elk. It was way too big to be a deer ran. It was fast, so we wasn't on four legs like a moose. And the guy I was with, he just kind of turned it off over the next week or two. I didn't. I went the other way. I started to really investigate what is this? What could I have possibly seen? And within a few months, found the BFRO and some on their database some sightings not too far from this area. One of which happened to be a reddish brown, tall creature that a woman saw in property back of her property, not far from her, within an hour there. So I thought to myself, my God, what am I seeing? Bigfoot? How could Bigfoot? I had the same perception people commonly have, which is that it's a singular creature in Northern California, solo, running around, if you will, Pacific Northwest. And I found it fascinating. So that got me diving into it. And I've been researching ever since. We had a sighting on one of the nights, and we had activity in a few different places. A couple wasn't as active, but a couple of places we really did. But we had a sighting, one group of four that were heading up a mountain that we had actually a few years ago scouted and had activity on. And they came around a bend and saw one cross in front of them, and it went up the high side. So it came from the lower ravine side of a lot of these mountainous trails that we try to traverse here and this part of the Appalachians, if you will. You're driving on a trail and there's a deep ravine on one side and a high side on the other. And this thing crossed from the lower side of the ravine and went up in front of them, which would be the passenger side of the vehicle, as it came around and went up the high side. And they saw it. So it's, standing. It was bipedal. Reach up, grab two trees and pull on the trees, pull itself up an embankment. Black. They went back next day. We did an artist rendering of it. Went back next day, found a print. They found the trees that had snapped off or pulled itself up from the ground below on from the road. So I successful in that. That's a Class A sighting. They knew it was not a bear or a human. BFRO identifies, witness report sightings as Class A, B, and C. And Class A says, discernibly it is not a bear or a human. We have that in there, and they knew. So, and then finding the footprint, that's just, validation. Finding the broken trees that it used to pull itself up, that's validation. So, successful from that standpoint. We had a number of other things happen that were interesting, some kind of beyond normal, but very good. I enjoyed it. We always, when we run these, we try to provide speaker content during the days. We do daytime scouting. We're very organized about our night hikes. We do debriefs the next morning, and so we try to get the most out of it for the folks that go. And we have an interview process and are selective about who's going to go. So we run these things, I think, pretty well. So I'm a BFRO investigator. I've led expeditions and I've investigated for the BFRO, and I had the northern 2/3 of Wisconsin for a few years, and then I was in Tennessee for about a year and a half. Now I'm in Western North Carolina. So I investigate cases in this area and talk to witnesses. I've got, I think, 8 cases right now, where I'm talking to people that have had sightings. And a lot of times, like me, they're not sure what they saw or encountered. Sometimes they still can't fathom what it is, but, I talk with them, try to vet those out. I also run expeditions. I've either attended and or am now running them, either solo or with another investigator. And I just ran one with a fellow investigator, friend of mine, Lori Wade from Chattanooga. And we ran one. We had, I think, close to 40 people, 36, 37. We were deep in the East Tennessee mountains. I can't disclose where, but we didn't have any cell service for 5 days. We were really out there.
What were the other things that happened that were maybe not as significant as a Class A, but still good?
Well, these things are great mimics. Um, so one of the things I've learned about Bigfoot over the years, and I know it's, I have a little business I run. We can see the on my hat, but called I Know Squatch. So I'll pitch that real quick. But I Know Squatch. We have merchandise and shirts, hats, T-shirts, challenge coins. Have an Etsy store, and I go to a lot of different. I speak at events, and then we sell merchandise and things. But really, we our whole approach. There's a lot of merchandise out there that says "I believe" and all that kind of thing. But for the folks that know what's real, we try to appeal to that. I know it's real. One of the things I've learned about these, because I've seen these things. I've had all kinds of interactions with them. Actually, Linda. I've had rocks thrown at me and recorded their vocals and cast their footprints and smelled their smell and all sorts of things. So I know they're real. But they're great mimics. They will do that to deflect and try to draw attention away from them. They're never one. One of the things I've learned is there's never like one of them solo. They're always in groups. So you got to think family units, etc. But when they mimic and make noises, that's fascinating. We did have some of that recently, especially in one of the spots which was kind of a small abandoned reservoir lake up in the mountains, and we had some high ground above it. But they were mimicking us. We were playing Native American music, which we find that always proactively works to bring them to interact. So we'll have a Bluetooth and run Native American music, but they were imitating the flute music. So we could hear them moving around us because we were in a little bit of a clearing on a hill and there was woods around us. We always try to give them a chance to advance or get near you. A lot of times from up above, but they seemed like maybe some juveniles, but they were low and below us in the brush. But we could hear them; they were mimicking the flute music, whistling and making noises. At first, it sounded like it's 1 a.m, morning doves, but it was ooh, 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 they were mimicking the flute noises, which is great. And some of the words we would say. So someone in our group would someone at one of the folks in our group said mm-hmm, like acknowledgement, and we heard it out of the woods. Mm-hmm. They were repeating what we do, and I've had that in the past where if they're fascinated with a sound, they'll repeat it. They have great ability to mimic and repeat sounds, and if they hear you doing that sometimes out in the woods and they're fascinated with it, they'll try to do it live, and I find that fascinating. So we had a lot of that in one spot where we saw some. The whole eye glow, eye shine thing. If you've researched this, there's a lot of debate about that. But we saw red in the woods clearly. We saw green at one point. That's odd to me. And then one of the things I've encountered with these over the years is I call them box lights, but you'll get like a flash of light that comes on for 2-3 seconds in the woods and goes out. It almost forms like a rectangle or a box and then goes out. And we had that in a couple of places. I had it in response to a whoop call I made at about 3 a.m. in one area. So it's some things that I can't explain how they do it, but that's not uncommon with Bigfoot research.
Did you get any recordings of all of those sounds?
Yeah, we one of the investigators we had with us he had audio of the whole thing. He's going through it all right now.
And the flash of light, you said that happens somewhat frequently. What do you think that is?
I think it's responsive on their part. I don't know how they do it. There's if you research this too, and I know you've talked to some other folks that have got some lineage researching these things. A lot of times I think this is a mistake, but we're all amateur researchers, by the way. This is not like it's federally acknowledged and certified or anything, but there are folks that dogmatically will say, well, they're a physical creature and they can only do so much that we know of other physical. It's an undiscovered primate, and therefore. And then there's some folks that on the quote unquote woo side will say, well, they're coming over from other dimensions or alien descent and all that kind of thing. I don't get hung up on that. I think it's all evidence, and you do get physical evidence with these things, audio recordings like you mentioned, footprint casts. Maybe you smell them or stick structures in the woods, that sort of thing. Those are physical. Then you have other things like lights that show up around them, or eye glow or eye shine, whatever you want to call it, whether it's bioluminescence or it's reflective that shows up in the woods when they're around, particularly when they're interested. And sometimes these strange lights happen. I don't know how they do it, but it seems to all of a sudden it'll have you pitch black and you're in the woods and you'll see a soft blue light up at 11 feet up in the woods, around a tree and then go out. And yellow happens. I've seen in Northeast Iowa years ago, we saw a lot of blue, almost like they were casting it out of their eyes, like a light flashlight would do. I don't know how they do it. I've had it happen in the UP of Michigan where all of a sudden the light would go off. We were out there. It's almost, and I do think it's responsive. Sometimes it'll happen when you get close to an area where they are, or after you leave an area we had activity in. And I do not know how they do. I can't answer that question, but they lights show up around them. Orbs, white, cue ball colored orb type things will happen. I had to have it 3 times to me last year research on expeditions. They would show up and you look down the trail and there's one following you kind of thing. I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah, I think that's an unknown at this point, scientifically, as to what's really happening with that. And like you said, there isn't a lot of just strength in that research at the moment, but hopefully one day we'll know what that is. But it certainly is a consistent theme through probably 75% of the interviews that I do. And the ones that talk about, well, they haven't experienced that, and I do trust that they have not experienced that, but a lot of interviewers don't ask the question. I find that it's not a voluntary thing that I get unless I ask the question about orbs. Once I ask the
Right.
question about orbs, it's about 75% of the people that have seen them around
Interesting.
this. Yeah, so it's a
Interesting.
very odd thing. And thank you
Yeah.
for volunteering that. I didn't even ask you about it.
Well, again, I think we make a mistake as researchers to dismiss it. So if I'm out with a group on an expedition, leading a group on a night hike, and we record howls, the next day we'll debrief, play those howls back, and say that's evidence. Great. If while we're out on a trail in the middle of the night somewhere, as I described, we turn around and there's a white orb we could see following us 3 or 4 feet over the creek line parallel to the trail, and we observe it for a few seconds, or we see one come down a ravine towards us and then disappear. Why would we not say that's evidence the next day? Why would we not? Because we don't know how it physically happens. Why dismiss that? So I think it's a mistake to dismiss evidence these days and say, well, that could not have happened. That's anything. I like Tom Powell and a lot of his books. And I talked to him a few years ago at Ohio Bigfoot conference. He said to me, it's all evidence. He did a great presentation on witnesses report paranormal type activity around Bigfoots consistently, to your point. And why dismiss it? He did a presentation where he put up all types of physical evidence, and then next chart was all types of what we can't explain. But his point is it's still evidence, and we should still consider it and not dismiss it.
Right, exactly. And a lot of people that just were really strongly mentally, flesh and blood creatures, then suddenly they have these unusual experiences around them, and they have to really reevaluate that, or just blow it off as an important factor. But thank you for sharing that. So this first Bigfoot that you saw again, can you give me a more detailed description of that one?
And I've had other Class A sightings. The first one I saw, as again, what struck me was again it was a reddish auburn brown. I clearly remember that color. It was striding, it was bipedal, so I could see it. It was fast, and it made a leap at the end. I did not know what I was seeing. I remember seeing that it was vertical and not horizontal, like 4 legs going. I could see that it was an upright figure. I could give you better descriptions from other ones. I saw one in 2016 in Northwest Colorado on an expedition. And anytime I've seen one of these things, I've had someone else see it, so which is good. But the one I saw there was 6.5 feet tall, black, standing in the middle of a trail right at dusk. It had got onto the trail behind us, and 2 of us turned and saw it. But I could see the things that I noticed about that was around the face. In the middle of the face there wasn't the hair that there was on the rest, and it was black. But the eyes, I could see in the eyes, did not have white. I couldn't see white. It was brown, almost like the pupil filled it all in. the face on it had a look of oh, I've been seen kind of. So it wasn't fierce and with teeth bared or anything. And it shook from the other things that it had no neck. I could see from the side, from the head to the shoulders, it looked like no neck at all. And the arms were very long down to its hands were down at knee level, if not below. So disproportionate, thighs shorter, disproportionate to human or bear, standing up, never went on all fours. But it shook from side to side, like, oh, I've been seen. And that was so that I clearly can see that. I can see that right now. I would say juvenile because it was about 6.5 foot tall. But we looked at it for a few seconds before it darted off and ran off the path. And I can still see that thing standing there right now. And I know that was not a human or a bear. I could see, but it was surprised we looked at it. So I got a longer look at it. I think it was surprised we looked back at it. Now there were five of us and we were all looking up the path in the canyon the other way. But Bigfoot research has taught me to turn around and look from where you came as much as you can. And daytime scouting or nighttime, turn around every now and then. And you'd be surprised, they follow, they show up, they cross trails behind you, all that kind of thing, because there's never one of them.
In your research, what is probably the one of the most interesting reports that you've researched?
So that's a great question. So you get hoaxes. I'll give you a couple. I think I'm at this point. I know these things are real. You're going to ask me at some point, what do I think they are, and I'm welcome to that. But I look for the behavioral elements too. So whether it's an experience on an expedition or my own research out in the woods, I had a whole area I was very active. I went into in the Kettle Moraine Forest in Wisconsin. I was in there every week, and I had gifting sites and everything. So I learned a lot through that. The witness reports, when you get legitimate ones, especially from hunters, the detail is good. And so behaviorally, you learn a lot about these things. And I have. I had a report, though. I'll give you, the short versions of this, but some of the better ones I've had have been from hunters or fishermen. I had a bow hunter in northwest Wisconsin, had a large piece of property, who saw 5 of these things at once crossing the back part of his property. It came out of a woodline, went across the field area up against the woods and towards a swamp. And what I found remarkable about that is he knew the sizes of each one and the distances in between each one as they went. And he could clearly describe them. Now, that's classic bow hunter. Bow hunters have to know their distances to make a good shoot. And the credibility was, from a witness standpoint, I thoroughly enjoyed talking with him because he knew everything about them. He knew the sizes of them. A couple were not as big as the others. Maybe it was a family unit. 5 of them could have been a family, a tribe. But he had them in a linear fashion, walking single file or, kind of rolling along at single file in the back of his property. He gave me every distance between each one of them and the heights of them based on the trees behind. That was fabulous. So to me, that's a great witness report. I had a fisherman. At one point, went into an area to go fishing, and he came out of the woods to an area where there was a bend in the river, and he saw something he described as about 4 foot tall and black on 2 legs run across out of the woodline and dive like an Olympic diver into the river, hands above its head. Now that could have been a child, or a small Bigfoot, but he was again, a fisherman, knew the area he was going in to fish. That wasn't new. And when this thing ran across an area that he knew it was something he hadn't seen, and it was running on 2 legs, black, again, which is a color you see a lot or you hear a lot about Bigfoots. But he described it as diving, put his hands out over his head and dove into the water, didn't come up, went, dove into the river area, a small river, and off it went. I like reports like that because the detail is there. And they're very, very good. You get reports, you get some crazy stuff, BFRO reports, from kids on a bus on their way home. And we saw a Bigfoot in the woods, and so you dismiss that stuff. But I like when you get detail from people that see something in an area they hunt frequently or fish, and they know the area, then all of a sudden it's there. I had a bear hunter who was using 5-gallon buckets full of sorghum and donuts and molasses kind of thing to bait. And he is pulling up at 7 a.m. just before the sun comes up one morning, bear hunting, to where he had his buckets full of bait, and this thing you could see from the distance. And he says, "Oh, I've got a bear. There it is." As he pulls up, this brown black mass stands up on two legs and turns and looks at him, holding the bucket in its hand. Now, those are great reports. So when I get those kinds of things, they're exciting to me because they are very, very legitimate reports. I'll give you one other one that I think I had a report down here where, and I went to the property, but they had Bigfoots crossing their property. There's a small pond below, at lower level below. This is in Western North Carolina, and I went out there, and Bigfoot, I think, was observing them from above while they'd sit at their fire pit. And walked through their fire pit one night after it rained, and I had all the pictures of all the footprints from the ash it traipsed out of there. That's a great report. I filed it, got it filed online. I had pictures, the whole bit's great. A couple of weeks later, I get a phone call from an outdoors person, a canoeist, because we have the Green River Gorge here, and in the Green River they practice for the Olympics, and they do a lot of competitive kayaking. And I get a call from a guy, and he's part of that. And he says, "We're in there every spring." And he said, this wasn't far from where the account was that I published. And he says, "We're in there every spring." He says, "We know these things are routinely around our campsites." He said, "We're in there practicing the whitewater rapids because the water's high." And he says, "These things come into our campsites and they open up coolers and go through things all the time at night. Lots of the kayakers have seen them. We've seen them. We know they're around." He says, "So I'm glad you filed your report because it validates in the area what we're seeing." He goes, "But it's not even guesswork. We know they're there." And the guy just chose to call me and tell me about it. And I said, "Well, why don't other kayakers file it?" He goes, "Our business is kayaking and getting competitive, so we can compete on a world stage." He says, we're not in the business of reporting Bigfoots, but he says, "We know they're there, and we hear them. We see them sometimes darting in and out of the camps, and they know we're there." I like stuff like that.
Have you ever had a situation where someone felt like they were in danger?
Yes. Yes, myself included. So if you've talked to other witnesses, maybe you've come up with the whole zapping thing. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay. So I've been zapped a few times, and it does make the apprehension, the fight or flight that comes along with that is not good. You do feel like you're in danger. I'm settled with, if they don't want you in a place, you've strolled into an area where they are, or even where they have children, kids, and they don't want you there, then that's a way to repel you, get you out of there. I think making and mimicking different noises is a way too. I've heard crazy noises that are unsettling, and everything from circular saws to babies crying to car alarms, metal signs being hit with rocks, all those kinds of sounds I've heard in the woods in the middle of nowhere, and that is unsettling. But when you get zapped, you feel like you're in danger. You feel like, "Oh, I got to get out of here," kind of thing. And if they don't want you around, you do get to go. Now, I don't think all Bigfoots are the same. I think there may be some good ones and some not so good ones, just like people. If they're, as I said earlier, if they want to mimic you and have some fun with you, like a flute noise or harmonicas, they have great luck with harmonicas. They'll mimic that sometimes. They don't want you to stop. They seem to like it when I play. But if they don't want you in an area, they're gonna do things to get you out of there. Probably one of the most notable, I thought I'd discuss that with you. When I had a research area in South Central Wisconsin, this northern unit of the Kettle Moraine Forest, I was in there routinely. I'd be on horse trails and things. But one morning, I used to go in very early in the morning before the sun came up, and I'd come out. But I had some areas in there that I knew they were in, family units. But early on and all that, I think they test you out, kind of, who are you, what are you doing here? But I was coming out after a couple hours being in the woods. It was 9:30 in the morning, and I knew they were following me. I'd found some evidence of them being in there, and they were tossing rocks over my head as I was walking out there, hitting me. These small pebbles were hitting me on the shoulder and stuff. And I turned, and looking in the woods with my binocular. I can't see them. So I walk again some more. And again, I was early in my research career here, so it happens again. I walk 30 yards, happens again. I'm looking in the woods trying to scan to see what this is, and I can't see it. And they must not have liked that I was holding a some type of device up to my eyes and looking, and would felt threatened by it because after going through this sequentially 3 times, they pushed a tree over behind me, and it was close. I went back, and I had an engineering guy with me, a fellow researcher. He said the tree weighed 1,800 pounds. But they pushed this tree over up about 9 feet. And the power and the sound of this was so devastating and so loud and so close to me that I felt scared to death, and I felt enormously threatened. And here we go, and don't get, and again, early on. So immediately I heard in my head, run, run, don't look back, don't look back. And I mean, I heard those words in my head distinctly. And I did. I ran 250 yards out of the trail on this trail to get out to my vehicle. Of course, your heart's pounding and everything else. But I heard that in my head: "Do not look back. Do not look back. Run, run." And I did. And that was threatening. So, but they didn't want me there for whatever reason. They didn't want me there. Maybe they're playing around with the pebbles, hitting because that happened several times. But maybe the threat came from me with looking through the binoculars into the woods trying to figure out what it was. They just didn't like that, and they chased me out of there. So that's, I've had a few things like that, getting zapped where it's uncomfortable, but I've also had trees pushed down close to me or rocks thrown at me or near me. And when you get that kind of behavior, it is threatening. You got to pay attention to it. I think you got a duty to go. You're intruding then. You're in their living room. And I respect that.
Any of your reports have any situations where anyone's been hurt or felt like they were going to be hurt?
Good question. I'd have to search my memory banks. I have some fellow researchers I've been out with that I know one that got nauseous. Uh, I've had I've had some that have felt like they were, well, they've been knocked out, unconscious, zapped, and fell down right in the middle of a field or on a trail. I had it happen once. A group of 5 of us, and 4 of us got zapped in the group, and it felt like electricity, and that hurt. Um, when I mean electricity, like you put a screwdriver into a socket, that kind of electricity. I mean, we couldn't even walk. So I think they can think of it like fight or flight, low end, uncomfortable is the dial set at like 1 or 2. If they want to turn it up, they can turn it up and get you out of there. And when it gets up 5, 6, 7, 8, you're in trouble. And whether that's infrasound or not, and that gets recorded. It's a low frequency hum, and it is unsettling. Whether they're using that or it's something else or a combination of infrasound and something else, they can they can make you feel uncomfortable. And so I've been around that. I've been on expeditions where people have come out of the woods after a night hike next morning been very unsettled. I've seen, as I said, people get nauseated, women cry, men say they're never going to go back in there. I've talked to hunters who've been intimidated and will never go back hunting in that area again, kind of thing. So if they don't want you around and they turn that off, you got to pay attention.
Any reports of sounds that or language like coming out, like the Sierra sounds?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it's kind of funny. I have one right now that is that. There's 2 guys that were hunting, and they went back and they listened to what they heard, went back and started listening to Ron Moorhead Sierra sounds. And I just was at a show with Ron Reles. I was talking to him about some of that too, and how remarkable it is. He had a guy. He's got a friend of his. Not to digress, a guy he does research with, Scott. His name's escaping me now, but he studies audio recordings and language, and it's fascinating. And he, not knowing what they're saying, but can study the inflection, enunciation, and can study those Sierra sounds and hear the interaction in there and know almost what they're saying. He takes it apart and says, well, that's an adult and it's trying to tell something to the juvenile to commanded, if you will, or that's an adult and they're telling something humorous or a joke because he can tell the other way the other one responds. I've heard it a number of times. Um, it's I don't think it's unsettling. I mean, it's odd. That hasn't when I've heard it, it hasn't threatened me. Most recently heard it scouting for an expedition in the mountains of South Carolina a year and a half ago, about 1:30 in the morning, cold. We were in a place and had two of us that were about 250 yards in forest road in the woods, and I was with two others near a vehicle parked at the end of a dirt cul-de-sac in the woods, and we had knock activity in between our groups, and it was cold. And so the two other guys I was with, both, one of them was tired, got in the car to sleep. The other one, a little handicapped and how he gets around, but he got in the vehicle. I'm standing out there by myself. Well, we got two other guys way in the woods, and I can hear two of these things talking with each other, and it's male because you can tell the deep, and just like the Sierra sounds. It sounds just like samurai chatter. You call it what you want, but there's a language there, and you can hear it. And it goes, oh, no, 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 it's fast, up and down. It's very up and down sort of thing, and it's not like we're talking now, deliberately enunciating our words. You can pick up the syllables, the connective tissue, and the words. There's, I'm sure it is to them, but boy, it moves when they talk. It's jibber jabber and it's moving fast and up and down. But you can hear them back and forth, one to another. I had that happen in North Georgia to me a few years ago too. Pitch black, and I had five of us, and it was females, and they were tossing rocks back and forth over our group, and we were seeing some things in the woods, and I could hear what I thought was talking. And I walked about 50 yards away from the group, and it pitch black, and I could hear these two females in the woods talking with each other because you could tell the voices. They were higher, very shrill, and loud, and back and forth talking with each other about us being in the spot that people never are, which is one of the secrets of Bigfoot research. Go out in the woods, act like hikers and interested hikers, not hunters, and be in the woods in the middle of the night somewhere where people never are, and they'll come around. And but I could hear these two females talking with each other, and very interactive. Um, I wish I knew what they were saying so I could talk with them, but I don't find it threatening.
Well, let's just go with the question that you knew I was going to ask. What do you think they are?
So I think they're physical beings with paranormal abilities. So I emceed an event up in UP, Michigan a few years ago with Cliff Barrickman and Dr. Meldrum, and Meldrum talked a lot about how his whole thing then is he's a relic hominid. And I just saw him speak recently at another event, and he's talking about the ratio of these things to bears in the woods and all that. I think that's great. He's a great skeptic. He's rooted in science, and if that helps him understand what they are, clearly that's great. I'm not ready to say that these things were dropped out like paratroopers out of UFOs routinely or thousands of years ago. I don't know that. I think they're physical beings, but they have paranormal abilities, and one of those abilities means now you see them, now you don't. I'm all right with that. I don't know. A lot of folks want to say, well, are you stepping in and out of dimensions? I don't know of anyone that's stepped in and out of a dimension, so I think it's hard to say that's what that is. I have talked to witnesses who were looking at them and could see it, a physical being, and then couldn't, and it wasn't there. I had that happen to me, and I can't explain that. I don't know what that is. I've seen them move. I have currently 3 habituation sites. I won't tell you where they are, where I routinely talk with the people that have them on their property, and I visit the property and I go, but they're in 3 different states. And one of them I was at a year ago, and we were sitting back in the property near the woods at night near fire. And I saw one of these things, black thing, dart right behind the other guy on his property, right behind him. I saw it just dart right by, like I could see this black shadow move right by, but I saw the outline, just like you see the outlines in the Believe with Bigfoot moving. And then he saw one go right behind me within an hour afterwards, So physical, but like a huge black shadow moving there. So sometimes it seems like they're they're here, but they're not. And I can't figure that out. When I say paranormal, abilities, I mean, they routinely will disrupt electrical, routinely will sap energy out of things we bring in the woods that are battery powered or charged. It goes on all the time with, FLIRs or audio recorders, walkie talkies. So that kind of thing goes on routinely with. How do they do that? I don't know. Physical beings, we don't do that. So how is it that they can do that? I do not. It seems they know intent. It seems they know what you're going to do before you get there. I don't know that. We talked about the orbs. I don't know how that happens. That's we as humans can't all of a sudden, conjure up an orb and send it down a pathway to see what's there. I think they use these orbs almost like a manifestation of energy that they can send around a bend like a periscope and see who's there. But because they seem to have moving intelligence. But the electrical interference, the lights I described in the woods, the shine of the eyes, or the mind speak kind of thing, the zapping. That people report loss of time when they're around these distance and not knowing where they are. I had that happen recently. I can't explain what all that is, but it happens around them. So those are paranormal abilities. Beyond the fact that they're a physical creature that leaves a huge footprint in the earth when it moves and when it makes a mistake of leaving it in the dirt. They physically pull down trees, bend things over, make a knocking type noise, whether that's physical or to make it themselves. They build things in the woods with structures, nests, etc. They eat all sorts of things. They're omnivores. They'll rob from farms. They're opportunistic eaters, and they'll eat the internals of deer. So they consume physically have physical needs to eat and drink water, and so they're always around water, waterfalls, things like that. So they are physical, but they have these other abilities too. So I'm okay with just saying that's what it is. I don't have to get stuck in the classification of their Gigantopithecus, Rev 7 from years ago, and they came over on a land bridge from China. I don't have to get stuck in all that. It doesn't bother. They're Neanderthal, or there's a lot of that going on out there. And there's a lot of books written about trying to justify that stuff. I'm not subscribing to one of those or the other. So again, I'm probably more open-minded than many people you talk about. I just know that I've had a lot of experiences with these things. It's a gift that keeps on giving. I'm continue to learn about it. And I'm all right with respecting these things, as the Native Americans say, and knowing that they're, a physical being that has abilities we don't have.
One person told me that the Bigfoot actually is the orb, and then when it goes back into the orb, that's when it's in like a light form, and then when it becomes physical, it's when it changes over into a physical form. But it can go back and forth. Have you ever seen one form out of an orb or go back into an orb, or anything that would indicate that that would be a truth?
No, I have not seen that. I have seen orbs many times. I saw one come out of the woods and circle all around a large group I had that was near a quarry. But we were having activity in the quarry, and we were having rocks thrown over the hill from the top. And the orb came out of the woods behind us. Again, I always looked behind the group and circled all around our group for a minute, and then went back in the woods. So it moved with intelligence. I saw one across 200 yards across the field a year ago, and then a night later, another group in the same area saw one there, and we debunked everything. It was not a light from a city or a starlight or anything. That we've been through all that, but it moved around on the other side with intelligence. I think it moves in intelligence. I'm not, to say it is a being in a different form. I do not know that. I know Matthew Johnson in his books and everything talks about them being in the trees and their beings, and that's where they, live and everything. Again, I think it's hard to physically justify that stuff and say what it is. I do not know that. Am I open-minded to it? Could be any of those things. Who knows? Could be. Maybe they are jumping in and out of dimensions. Who knows? I have one witness has him, as I said, on his property, and he goes, he's got in the back of his property some stations. He leaves toys and different types of fruit, and they interact with him, etc. And sometimes he says he's there, and he can sense her right behind him. He can't see him. And then he'll be moving things. He turns around and not 10 feet away, and then something moves right next to him. So he takes pictures of things that he moves, and then comes back after night and they move things around. But he's in the process of laying things out and taking pictures of what he's on these stations he has down in the woods, whether it's toys or fruit and that sort of thing. And he turns around where he had just done it and something's moved. Now, I don't know. I can't explain that. How can they be doing those sorts of things? But it does happen, So, long answer to your question, but it's possible. I don't know. If someone has seen it, more power to them. I do know the orb thing gets reported a lot around.
Moving back into the expedition, sounds like you've gone on a lot of those. Kind of what is your routine when you go out, and what's the most likely things to do to be able to actually have some kind of evidence or sighting or an interaction?
So very good question. And I probably over the years have either attended or organized, been part of. Most of the times I'm part of the organizing, presenting, and or helping to bring groups out at night, debrief next day activity. I've probably done 40 of these things or so. So it's a lot. We have the BFRO is good in that they, post these on BFRO.net. There's different investigators that will run these around the country. I think you've talked to some of them. I'll tell you the way I like to run it, and others can run it differently. But the BFRO does have a handbook, and that's good. And there's some rules and regulations around it. I find though what's best is, get your groups together for night hikes. We always scout the areas before we go. It's not random. We don't just drop out of the sky into a section of woods or a state park. But we'll have a base camp area somewhere. And when I do these, I like to scout for a good year, even longer ahead of time before we go. So I know the forest road trails for us to take. I can get maps printed out. We have other investigators there. So if there's a group of, say it's 30, 10 of them are investigators, 8 of them sort of thing. So we break into groups at night and go out into places. So we'll leave base camp and go 20 minutes, half hour, and all points of the compass directions to other areas where we can take and go up into the woods, usually near water, moving water, creeks, streams. And these are all predicated on there has been activity in the area, sightings. So we know they're there. We know there's activity, and then get into those areas and then have some. I do not like to have groups on top of each other. I know sometimes, there are investigators who will have a base camp and then say, okay, we're just going to leave base camp and walk into the woods from here. I don't like that. I don't like it because if you do any provocation, like a whoop sound or a whistle or a knock, you could step on the other groups. And even though you have audio and you're telling each group, hey, I'm going to do some provocation right now. Next day when you debrief, it winds up being, well, we thought we heard a howl from the west, and that was group number 2 responding to group number 1. And so I like to get people out apart from each other miles. But you get your groups out. I like to get out by dusk. Sometimes some researchers don't like to do it until a couple hours past that. But I think it's good to know where you are. Get to a forest road and at dusk and hike a mile back into some area, and then it turns really dark. I think that these things see you approaching and come in. It's good. They also know your way out that way, which is good. But then I think you have to make yourself curious. So you asked, what is it that brings activity? I'm not beyond having if you got 6 people, everybody gets a role too. We always have a group leader. So if there's 6 in a group, one that leads the walking group in, one that's at the back, 3 new people in between, or maybe a repeater, someone who's taking notes, either on a phone or on a, writing it down. We'll have small notepads we hand out to the groups, because we debrief next day and go over the notes. Someone who's assigned to make sure we have a walkie-talkie to talk to other groups if we need to, and we always have an audio recorder. Sometimes we'll put it in a hat or in a shoulder, you carry it, but we always have audio going. So we're recording. And then someone in the group who was going to do a knock type of thing, use a jam block or hit a tree or a hollow log, whistle, whoop. We bring whistles, owl calls, things like that. But if you watch the show, I've said this, and I always tell the groups, it makes for good TV. Whether you're watching Expedition Bigfoot or Finding Bigfoot, for them to get out in the woods and call blast, whale sounds and other things, to me that doesn't work. I never really have good response with that. And think about it. If somebody showed up in your living room and started making a lot of loud whale noises, how the heck would you respond? So, yeah, I think get yourself to a point. I don't mind being in the dark and being quiet, but act that almost you almost get in a little bit of a standoff then. I think you walk on a trail and you talk and you're comfortable and you attract some attention. Maybe I like glow sticks, hanging a couple of those in the trees. Just build a small fire back in the woods, play harmonica or sing, listen, talk, and then when they seem to know, like you're huddled up in one place, you're sitting in the dark, that you're there. It's good then if out of a group of six, three get up and walk down the trail a couple hundred yards and then come back. You're when you're unpredictable like that, it kind of drives them crazy because they want to walk, they want to follow you, and there's not as again, there's never one of them. So all of a sudden they deploy maybe a couple of juveniles to follow you on the high ground above you. And then I like the inchworm technique where you're walking a trail and you have somebody that leads, walks by themselves, and then a group of two or three catches up to them and then goes by them, and then a group of three that's lag behind catches up with the one that walked first, and then the one that walked first walks again. So when you're unpredictable and you're curious out in the woods, they seem to come around. You're not a threat. You're if you're out there knocking like it's an Olympic sport, banging away on things, I think you just aggravate them. They may come around to see who you are, but then they're going to retreat and walk away. But if you're curious and you're out there, different colored lights, playing Native American music, different types of, I've used Irish flutes, Native American flute, different types of sounds that they get fascinated with. It seems they'll come around then. And if you're not intrusive, you're not out there chopping trees down, just being obnoxious, they'll come around. If you're obnoxious, they're not coming around.
Do you think there are more of them now, or are there just more reports?
I think as the population spreads out and moves out, suburbia moves out, and into the wooded areas, I think that all of a sudden those areas that they've traversed, walked, or habituated in forever, and then now, well, there's people around. I think that drives the reports. I think also it's okay to talk about it now. Whether there's online TV shows, books written, there's loads of information out there. There's shows, conferences, people like myself talking about it on podcasts or on shows or at conferences. I'll be talking at one in Virginia in a couple of weeks. There's opportunity to learn about it, and it's okay to talk about it. I've had witnesses I've interviewed who have literally broken down into tears over this because they've had activity on their property for generations and could never speak about it for fear of ridicule in a community. Even folks that have held positions in the community, that takes away their credibility and they're afraid of it. So historically, it was not something you could talk about. I think that's changing, which is good. Do I think there's more than there were in the past? I don't know. I'll answer it a different way. I think there's a lot of them. And again, I'm not hung up on what the number is. Now the BFRO will say thousands. There's a lot of speculation about that. Talk about it on shows. I think the biggest fallacy with the Expedition Bigfoot show is that first year they thought they knew everything and they had an algorithm. They were going to go in the woods and there's one place, I think it was Washington or Oregon, and they had a 2-week window and things are going to move through because of the reports. Come on, we don't know. Maybe if you know what the species is, if you're tracking movement of a type of fish or something in the ocean that you could observe over. But with Bigfoot, who knows? So I think it's kind of crazy to say their movement and how many there are. But I think there's a lot of them because we're amateur researchers and we're out there and we have activity. We see them, run into them, they interact with us, they come around campsites, and that happens on a wide scale. So one of the things that people know now versus 20 years ago, as I said earlier in this interview, people used to think, well, it was a solitary creature, maybe in Northern California. Now people talk about it like it's resident all over the place. United States, North America, other parts of the world. It has names in other parts of the world, Yeren in China, Yowie in Australia, the list goes on. So there's acknowledgement that these things are there. There's not validation. We don't have a government certified report that comes out and says what these things are. And I think that's because the government doesn't know everything about them. You and I in this conversation probably know as much, if not more. But I think there's a lot of them. And there's a lot of forest land out there that we are not in. Just because we have a state park and a piece of land that's, 50,000 acres does not mean we know everything about those 50,000 acres or the hundreds of thousands surrounding it. There is a lot of greenway. There's a lot of forest land. There's a lot of places that we can, as humans, go, and these things do. And I think there's a lot of them.
Well, what else would you like for us to know?
I think for people that are fascinated with this, research it. Read books. There's a lot more out there. When I first got into this 13 years ago, there was a few. I read a couple things, Lauren Coleman, Meldrum, Robert Morgan, some of that. There was a few things out there, but not a lot. There's a lot more now. But I'd read and catch up. I would try to read whatever you can. There's podcasts now. Whether you can find I do different ones. It's okay to listen to people give an account of what they experienced. Sasquatch Chronicles is great. Listen to Wes' interview. He lets people talk. I like that. Listen and kind of for yourself, kind of judge what it is. Try to learn about it. There's more research. Number one, there's more out there now than there was years ago. So however your intake, whatever your intake is, how you want to get knowledge about it, there's more now than there was. Number two, if you're interested, and I see people at conferences, and I spoke at one last weekend in Marion, North Carolina, and talked about expeditions and getting out. And a lot of people come by the booth and were talking to me. I have a booklet you can get on Etsy, and I know Squatch. It's about stick structures, and you can take it in your backpack and go out in the woods and take a look. And I think we sell them for like $6. I'm in my 4th edition, but it's got actual pictures of stick structures that Bigfoot could have built in the woods. And I think if you're fascinated with this and you get out in the woods and you look around, you see something you're not sure of, take a picture, get some scale in it, take a picture, try to learn about it. But I would say for people that are out in the woods looking around for these things, they're going to see you before you see them, or they're going to know you're there before they are, if you even do, and they could be right there. Be patient, be polite, and be respectful, and don't go alone. I'm not a big fan of wandering around on the woods on your own. There's times I said I wish I didn't know everything about what I know is out there, and because they're unpredictable. But there are a lot of them, and I think they keep an eye on us. They're great patient observers, and we ought to know that. So, number two, if you get out and you think you're doing some amateur research, maybe you stumble upon some of these things. Maybe you hear a noise, a knock, or a whoop or something. Don't be afraid to take a recorder with you, but don't go solo. Go with someone else and be respectful. And number three, the BFRO.net site is great because you can go look right down to the county and see any county where you live or surrounding counties or someplace you're going to visit. And you can see where there's been activity that's been vetted out by an investigator. And the actual reports are published where there's been sightings or interaction in an area. And that's a great way to do some research and try to learn about these things too. So, I have some Native American friends who always tell me, again, be respectful of these things. They're forest people. And I think last thing I would say is, look at them as forest people. It's not just an undiscovered primate running around in the woods eating bananas. It's, think of it like forest people, and there's always more than one of them. And be comfortable with the fact that they're out there.